Friends, good evening. My name is Jay Simmons, and I'm the president of Simpson College, and it's a privilege to welcome all of you for our Iowa History Center event featuring our distinguished alumnus and good friend, Gerry Berry. Thanks to all of you for being here tonight. Before we begin, the Iowa History Center wishes to thank the Alumni Office and Simpson Forum for helping with this event. Tonight's program is made possible in part through the generous support of Jim and Ellen Hubble, Fred and Charlotte Hubble, Rusty Hubble, and the WT and Edna M. Dahl Trust. Please note that the Iowa History Center Speaker Series is only one of many programs at the center which relies on donations to keep it going. We ask that you consider a gift for the center, and for your information, you can pick up a brochure at the conclusion of the program. As a friendly reminder, please turn off your electronic devices, and at the end of the program, please take a moment to fill out the evaluation form and drop it off at the table just outside. It's now my pleasure and privilege to introduce Gerry Berry. Gerry was born and raised in Anaconda, Montana, before his family moved to Des Moines while he was in high school. He graduated from Des Moines Tech High School and then enrolled at Simpson College, where he majored in history and played football and basketball. He received his draft letter shortly before he graduated in 1967 and entered the Marine Corps the following year. Gerry went to flight school and was ordered to Vietnam as a helicopter pilot in 1969, where he transported troops to and from missions. After a year, he was transferred to California for training on jets and turboprop planes. He returned to Vietnam in 1975 as part of Operation Frequent Wind, evacuating remaining personnel from Saigon. Among the passengers Gerry ferried to safety was U.S. Ambassador Graham Martin as North Vietnamese troops were entering Saigon. Gerry was awarded 3 Distinguished Flying Crosses for his service in Vietnam. He remained in the Marine Corps for 25 years before becoming president of Star Media and then president of Covenant Aviation Security. At the end of the program, or at the end of his prepared remarks, Gerry's agreed to take a few questions. We would ask those of you who are posing questions to please wait a moment so we can bring you the microphone so that your question can be recorded as part of the tape recording of tonight's program. Gerry's program is entitled From Simpson to Saigon. Please join me in welcoming our alumnus, Gerry Berry, to the podium.
You know, I can't tell. I guess it sounds okay. Then? All right. Mr. President, thank you very much for that kind introduction. First, Bill Fredericks. I want to thank Bill, Darrell, thank you very much for putting this program on. I appreciate it. And now, of course, I have to start my remarks with some other things. I want to give a yell out to a few people who have really made my life wonderful here the last couple of years. Coach Matt Jeter, he allowed me to be coach for a day. They won the game. He allowed me to attend something, and he's also American River's Coach of the Year this year. So good shout out for Matt. I don't know what Matt is. Your basketball coach, Brad Jerkin. Where's Brad? I thought I saw him out here somewhere. Yeah. He's always very welcoming, and he actually helped us put on a free throw contest among alumni for the reunion. I wouldn't bring it up, of course, but I won it. So thank you, Brad. He's very accommodating. If you ever watch him play, it's a great thing. And I don't know where Brian Niemerth is here or not, but Brian's the coach of the ladies basketball team, and I love looking at his record. I love watching him play, but Brian's probably got the greatest record, wins and losses, in the history of Simpson College. It's fantastic. Look at him. And I want to give a couple of shout-outs to Brian, even though he's not here. Every once in a while, we all have our interests wane and go on certain issues. And Brian, thank you for letting me ride back with the ladies softball team. I got to sit with all the ladies softball players on the way back, the way up here from Orlando, Florida. So it was wonderful, and wonderful gals. That was fun. But every once in a while, your spirit kind of wanes and flows for your college or high school. It doesn't matter what it is. And mine was rekindled. This gal, Laura Peterson, got me rekindled in this thing. And then if you look at her, she does about everything. If you go to the Cars golf tournament, she's doing something with that. She did the Red Mock reunion. She sells programs. And so I would say to, I don't know, I think Bob Nutgrass, I like Red, I don't think he's here. I think he's got health problems. And Lina Smith, but I say they've done a great job, a fantastic job of putting this athletic department together. For people who don't know it, 53% of the student body plays a sport here. From my days here, I can't imagine that. I can't imagine how you coordinate, train, coach, and schedule all that. So the athletic department, I think, does a fantastic job. And I got to tell you this, I have a favorite person here. She's a cheerleading coach. Where's Heather? But Heather just recently became the executive director of the YMCA here, and topping my honor as coach for a day, she allowed me to be cheerleader for her. And Heather's just probably the most wonderful ambassador for Simpson College. I hope you're staying on as a cheerleading coach when...
I hope so too.
Okay. As she takes over her other job, but they've all made it a lot of fun. And where's Bob Lane? He always comes to visit me. I guess he doesn't like me anymore because he didn't visit me this year. As Mike Cunningham would say, maybe you didn't give enough money if you gave enough money. Anyway, I want to thank you all for coming. And as I start this, I spoke recently at the Naval War College, and one of the first questions was, how did we get in to a war, the United States of America, a war against North Vietnam? It doesn't make any sense. I said, I don't know, but I'll research a little bit. So I'm going to divide this thing into 4 little parts tonight, like quarters in football. First, we're going to talk about how we got into the war with North Vietnam. 2, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we fought the war. And 3, I'm going to talk a little bit about how these 4 Simpson pilots, Marine pilots, fought in the war in Vietnam. And then finally, I'm going to talk about how we ended the war. But first, I'm tired. I can't remember why I was here, so I need to be reintroduced. So I always pick somebody out from the crowd. How do you turn this thing on? Try that out. Could you introduce me? Please, turn that on. You better be good. You get 15 words or less.
Please welcome that roguishly handsome global soldier of the sea, Gerry Berry.
Well, thank you. That's maybe one of the best introductions I've ever had. Then I guess I will reiterate, the last part of this will be how that roguishly handsome Marine ended the war in Vietnam. All right, let's get started. The war, how did we get into this war in Vietnam? You have to start, the French came in to colonize Vietnam, Indochina in the 1860s. They did it for raw resources. They did it for profit, of course. Rubber and rice were their big ones, and they weren't doing anything for the Vietnamese. The French were able to do this for, is the right one up? Yeah. For 80 years, they kept control of Vietnam, and they exploited the resources. And then we had this great event. And actually Saigon became known as the Paris of the Far East. And then, of course, in 1940, we had another significant event. The Germans, World War II, marched in 6 weeks, defeated the French. The Japanese realized this was probably an interesting thing for them. They moved immediately into North Vietnam and took control from the French of North Vietnam. They did an interesting thing. They allowed the French, because they said they had a long-term interest, to administer for them. The Japanese took the resources, the rice and the rubber, but the French stayed as the administrators. The French basically had no country. Remember, the Germans were in Paris. This war, of course, Japanese weren't done. They decided they needed to stop the United States Pacific Fleet from stopping them from getting their resources, so they decided that bombing Pearl Harbor was probably a good deal. War's on. Remember, the war rages for 5 years. In 1945, of course, it comes to an end. And at this period of time, you know, the French have been occupied for a few years. What do they want to do? Ho Chi Minh wants independence. Ho Chi Minh's the leader of Vietnam at this point in 1946. But the French think they should get their colony back. Doesn't make any sense. They've been occupied for 4 years, but they want their colonies back. But there's a big player on the scene now. Big player is the United States of America. And this is President Roosevelt. He insists that the French not allowed to have those colonies back. He was not going to give them the colonies back. And this is an interesting point. This is a turning point in history. And he's not going to go back. He's going to set up a trusteeship working towards Vietnam independence. But he dies in office. Harry Truman becomes president. Harry changes all that. He decides, his administration decides that we want the French back in Vietnam. We not only want them back, we take them back on military shipping. We take their military back on United States shipping. I think it's an unbelievable mistake. And then we start funding the war. We turn this into, becomes a war between Ho Chi Minh and the Viet Minh versus the French. And it lasts for 8 years. The French, just like we're going to do when we get in the war, are going to control the cities, the roads, and the lines of communication. The Viet Minh, Ho Chi Minh's people, are going to control the countryside. So what happens? 8 years of bloody war, and the French are defeated in 1946 at a battle, Dien Bien Phu. It's a humiliating defeat. The French now want out. And America at this point is supporting 80% of the war financially. We're not committing any planes, any men, although it's talked about in DC, but we're funding the French at 80%. This is what happened. 46 to 54, the French have 117,000 casualties. Think about that. That's a lot. War's over. What's happened? The French won out. We have the Geneva Convention, the Geneva Conference. What comes out of this is the French are going to leave, finally get the arms to sign. And there's a lot of big players in this thing. The United States is a player, the Soviet Union's a player, China's a player, of course Vietnam, French are a player, the British are a player, Australia, New Zealand. They're all players in this convention. But one country doesn't sign up, and also says it doesn't have to adhere to the Geneva Convention, the Geneva Conference. That's the United States of America. This is what happens. The French have to withdraw. It's the 17th parallel. It's going to divide the countries. They're going to work towards independence. There's going to be an election in 56. That's what really happens. Catholics move south. The French have turned in a great portion of this into a Catholic country. The Viet Minh supporters, they were called Viet Cong, and they'll be in the south, but they move north. And then, of course, the United States steps in. We start funding, training the Army of South Vietnam's military. Viet Minh, of course, are getting support from China and Russia. We have a favorite guy now. It's called Diem. He's the president of South Vietnam. Here's President Eisenhower. In 1956, we set up what we call a MAC-V, Military Assistance Command for Vietnam. At this point, the United States of America has taken over all training for the Vietnamese. We're funding them, we're giving them military gear, and we're sending advisors to train. This isn't, and then NDM decides we can't have the election, of course, with American support. We're not going to have the election to see who wins if we can put Vietnam back together, because they were afraid that Ho Chi Minh would win. And I must say, this whole thing, American support, is done, we have to remember, in the backdrop of the Cold War. And that's, the Cold War is, of course, between the communist countries and the democratic countries for freedom, which is, of course, Britain and the United States. But that's the backdrop, because some of this kind of bothered me, how we got into Vietnam, but if you kind of get the backdrop, this is what happens. We don't allow elections. America's very complicit in this. And then, in 1959, we lose our first two military guys. 2 Army soldiers are killed in Vietnam. Eisenhower leaves office, we get Kennedy. Kennedy does find the Foreign Assistance Act, which basically says we will help anybody on the periphery of communism to fight this war. And I think you can remember some of the great sayings by Kennedy, yes, not what you can do for yourself, but what you can do for your country. And so he's willing to pay any price. Now, we had 200 advisors in Vietnam when Eisenhower leaves. We rapidly moved to 18,000 combat support troops in Vietnam under Kennedy. There's an interesting thing. I only put him up because I'm a Marine. He's a Marine. Even at this stage in 1962, there was very strong advice not to get involved in a land war in Southeast Asia. Of course, that's a commandant of the Marine Corps, probably smarter than the other Joint Chiefs of Staff. That was his advice. But we do get involved. We get involved heavily. The troop buildups continue, and then there's this really, I guess I would say, bizarre act. We're kind of tired of DM. We don't think he's doing a great job. We want to get rid of him. Our CIA gets involved, and the generals in Vietnam decide to have a coup. Well, they go further than the Kennedy administration ever thought they were. They end up killing DM and his brother. So now we have the leaders that we choose, they're Army generals in charge of Vietnam. The funny thing about this, or not funny, it's the tragic thing about this, is 21 days later, of course, John F. Kennedy's assassinated in Dallas, Texas. And now President Johnson's in charge. The troop buildups continue. We continue to put forces and forces into Vietnam. And then we have, in the middle of 1964, we probably got 60, 80,000 support troops. We're not calling them combat troops yet. We have this Gulf of Tonkin happen. And what the Gulf of Tonkin is, it's interesting, it's 2 American destroyers, the Maddox and the Turner Joy, are in international waters, supposedly, but they're attacked by North Vietnam torpedo boats. Now, it's interesting to read about this because you never can confirm whether they were really attacked or not. There was no damage to the ship, there was sonar involved. But out of this act that maybe, or maybe not, we haven't proven one way or the other yet, comes the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. And this gives President Johnson and his Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara, and Westmoreland, who's in charge in Vietnam, ability to defend, send more troops, and bomb. Shortly after this, we start bombing strategic sites in North Vietnam. The troop buildups continue. But I think there's several great quotes, if you study this era, by Johnson. One is, we'll never send American boys to fight in an Asian war. 2, war is easy to get into, very, very difficult to get out of. But this is my favorite. He wants out. He can't figure it out. What the hell does Vietnam mean to me? Kind of tragic. There's the anguish on the faces of our leaders. That's McNamara and Johnson. And of course, the guerrilla warfare that rages in Vietnam. I always thought this quote was great. Remember, Goldwater ran for president in '64, was beaten by Johnson, but he began calling these 2 guys, Johnson and McNamara, the twin commanders of chaos. And we were into chaos. We send, basically, when the real war begins, we finally start calling them combat troops. So obviously it's when the Marines get there. We send a couple battalions to land at Da Nang in early 1965, and the real war is on. McNamara had an interesting thought on war. This is where it was graduated pressure. If the Vietnam did something, if North Vietnamese did something, he would retaliate. And he retaliated with more. If they sent troops, then we'd send twice as many to Vietnam. So it became a war of escalation, vice negotiation. We're having that. And McNamara's an interesting guy, former president of Ford Motor Company, where he actually designed the Edsel, which was a big failure, but that's beside the point. He thought that war was a way of communicating with the enemy. It's bizarre to read. He thought if he upped the pressure, then Vietnam would act in a certain way, but they never did. They just kept upping the pressure back. So it was a war of escalation. Westmoreland, what was our strategy? We had several strategies in Vietnam. We went to pacification for anybody who's there, and I think we have some vets here. We went from pacification to strategic hamlets where the farmers could go out and work the fields, the rice paddies during the day, and then come back to these protected hamlets at night. That didn't work. Pacification didn't work. Then we went to search and destroy. But basically, what we came to, this was hard for you to take when you're in Vietnam, was this a war of attrition, body count. Body count. That's never going to work. But this was a strategy we had. The war rages. But Ho Chi Minh had an answer for this. He told the same thing to the French. For every 10 of mine you kill, I'm going to kill one of yours, but in the long run, I'll be victorious. Obviously, we didn't understand the enemy very well at this point. There's another interesting part of this. The Joint Chiefs of Staff, it refers to a couple books I've read refer to as 5 silent men. Well, they were just kind of excluded by Johnson, McNamara, Westmoreland, probably Secretary of State Dean Rusk. But in the White House during this time, 65, 66, the bombing targets are decided in the White House. They're not conferring with the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And it's Johnson, McNamara, Rusk, and George Bundy probably picking the targets in North Vietnam. It seems rather bizarre today after my 25 years in the military that was allowed to happen. But that was the Johnson administration. He had a lot of other things on his plate, and he had the Cold War there. He didn't know how to get out of Vietnam, and I think he was just picking and choosing. By 1968, think of this, compare 550,000 combat soldiers in Vietnam. That's a lot. War rages on. Obviously, those are CH-46s because I flew CH-46s, so they get the big display here. Remember, in late 67, very early 68, Westmoreland comes home, addresses Congress and says, whoa, there's light at the end of the tunnel, we've turned the corner, we're going to win. It may take a couple more years, but we've turned the corner. Then, unfortunately, for McNamara, Johnson, and everybody, we had the Tet Offensive in late January, early February of 1968. It explodes. The Viet Cong, which are the indigenous South Vietnamese communists, attack up virtually every city with North Vietnamese support in South Vietnam. Of course, the press gets this, it was crazy. Actually, the Viet Cong were pretty much devastated by Americans and South Vietnamese soldiers, but that's not what he got in the press. Walter Cronkite turned against the war. The American people turned against the war. We get demonstration on basically every campus. And I think I don't know how many of you are old enough, but this picture on the far right corner is, I think, probably the most tragic thing. That's actually the chief of police in Saigon. They found a Viet Cong communist, and right on TV, pulls out his gun, shoots him in the head. So everybody saw this. It was played over and over again. Obviously showed that things weren't as good as they could have been. And this had always been a jungle war up till this point. We were fighting a guerrilla warfare, the search and destroy, where we'd send troops out different places to find them. But now, the North Vietnamese army, the rescue unit done by the Viet Cong, took the other cities or attacked the other cities. But Hue City, the ancient imperial capital, was attacked by NVA regulars, North Vietnam regulars. And so, if you got a big deal like this, world, you can't send the army, you send the Marines. So the Marines have to retake Hue City. But this is so different because it's battle in a build-up area. It's a city. We have to go block by block, house by house. The Marines fight for 6 weeks. Of course, it's on TV every night. We just devastate, just destroy a couple of Marine battalions, but they finally take the city 6 weeks later. But again, it's on the press every night. Now, 1968. Of course, Nixon comes on the scene, but you got to think about 1968. Tet Offensive, demonstrations on virtually every campus. We have race wars, race battles in a lot of cities. And Martin Luther King is killed in the spring. He gets assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee in the spring of 1968. Robert Kennedy is assassinated after winning the Democratic election, their Democratic primary in California. He's assassinated in June of 1968. President Johnson decides he's going to stop the bombing, and he's not going to run for president. And then we have, of course, the mass craziness that went on in Chicago with the 1968 Democratic Convention. Out of that, obviously, President Nixon wins. We've got a new turn. But now we're going to turn the world a little bit. It's because now we have 4 Simpson graduates going. So things are going to get better. And 3 of them are basketball players. I got to show this. This is Doug Simmons, Lincoln Des Moines graduate. I'm a Tech at Des Moines High School graduate. We played against her in high school and played together here. Tom Schmidt, probably too handsome. I didn't like him that well. He was a fraternity brother. Another basketball player against in high school, played with a teammate here. And then Steve Boyum, who I don't know, other than he was a Lamb Mackay. Enough said. This is interesting for me. I'm glad this was a defensive stance. I want to yell out one thing. My high school basketball coach is here. Where are you, Larry Gillespie? There he is, right back there. And we had lunch yesterday. And he said, "Wait, you never played any defense?" I said, right there. Come on. But it's great having you here. And my coach, of course, I love him. He's a World War II vet. He was a running back at Drake. And then probably a pretty good basketball coach till he got me and Smitty. Things probably went downhill for him. It was a great time. But it's interesting because things are changing now. We're all going to go to Vietnam. This is kind of like halftime. We're halfway through my presentation or better. And all I want to point out is there's up the top picture, of course, the really good guy on your far right is me. And then Coach Dick Starr. Where's Coach Starr? I know he's here. This Coach Starr, who coached at Indianola High School, and then a long-time Simpson basketball coach and a football coach. I have to say something about it because, you know, to me, Indianola and Simpson were really a blessing for me. They were really a blessing. They were my foundation. And this guy, Coach Starr, I thought if I could ever be like anybody, the true gentleman, great coach, it would be Coach Starr. Kind of makes me proud. You can't really tell up there, but the guy on the far left, John L. Sullivan, football coach, great guy. I think he's still, until Matt Jeter probably changes this, first one to ever take Simpson to a bowl game. Did very well. Had a lot of winning seasons. Great guy. I lived with him for 6 months when I was coaching here, and lifelong friend. The guy in the middle between those guys is Coach Larry Johnson, and I think is his granddaughter still here? There she is. Catherine is here. I got to say this. I loved him. He was a great guy, and he was kind of my mentor on the athletic side. He took great care of me. And on the academic side, I had, most people know, Dr. Joe Walt, also a great man. This is why it was so fun being in this community. But Larry Johnson was the athletic director. I used to travel with him, ride with him a lot. He gave me a job here. I swept the stairs in Hopper Gym. I still check those stairs. And I think maybe I could get the job back. I'm not sure. But anyway, I was supposed to sweep these stairs, or whatever they needed, every morning by 8 o'clock. I wasn't as diligent as I could be. And one morning I come up, and Coach Johnson, the athletic director, is sweeping the stairs. It's a little embarrassing. I said, Coach, that's my job. He said, well, when you really care about somebody, you take care of them. He said, we got visitors coming, kind of important to me as the athletic director, that I got the message. And I've never forgotten it. I think I used it all my life. The point is, if somebody gives you a job, show up on time every day and do that job to the best of your ability. He taught me one other thing. I could have a little too much bravado. You would never guess that when we were playing sports. And I could be very indignant when we lost. So he said, Gerry, I'm going to teach you something. He said, you always got to be magnanimous in victory and lose with dignity. Lose with dignity. And I thought, I always remember that. He said, because the point is, it's in sports, it's in life, it doesn't matter. That's the way you have to do it. You're going to win a lot, you're going to lose a lot in life. All right, we're back to the war stories now. Vietnam. I'm going to tell you the 4 questions we all had when we went to Vietnam in early 1969 was, who started the war? Just saying we haven't answered yet. Between North Vietnam and the United States. These are all young lieutenants asking these questions. 2, what's it all about? And we kind of heard the domino theory and protect South Vietnam, but it really didn't make a lot of sense to a lieutenant what we were doing, because the 3rd thing was, who was winning? Let me tell you, in 1969, we had no idea who was winning. As a 46 them in, a lot of them would get killed and wounded, and we'd probably lose a couple helicopters resupplying, taking out KIAs, MIAs, WIAs, whatever we had. And then we'd bring them home. And they'd be basically a decimated battalion. They'd come offline. Maybe a week and a half later, we'd take another battalion out, almost to a similar place, and we do the same thing over and over again. And this had been going on since 1966. It wasn't just the Marine Corps doing it, it was the Army doing it. So you didn't see any progress, you weren't getting any territory, all you were doing was killing people. They were killing you. So this is the way the war was going. Finally, we didn't know how the war was going to end. We know now because that roguishly handsome global soldier of the sea will end the war at some point. But now I got to tell you a real war story. So in the fall of 1969, we have a recon team that had been put in the Ashaw Valley. And I had a section of two CH-46s. It's a 5-man recon team. We're supposed to pick them up. Not a big deal. We can do that. My attack helicopter support that day is Doug Simmons, Simpson graduate. This is the first time I'd seen him in a long time. So we kind of get giddy over this. We fly out to the Ashaw Valley where this recon team is. They're fine. But there's this cloud layer. It lays over the valley. You've probably seen it in certain places. The cloudy here today is different. So the mountains you could see around, but this cloud layer maybe 150 to 200 feet thick. And you don't know what you got below that. So anyway, we go out that day, we can't get through to get them out, we fly back, we do the same thing again the next day. The third day we go back, but now they've been in contact, they have a wounded Marine. Now the situation changes. So I thought, well, we got to get them out. Once they've had contact, if you leave a recon team out there, they're not going to make it. They're just not, the enemy's too sizable. So Gerry Berry decides he may be a little smarter than most. I said, if I get the recon team to shoot a star cluster up through this pod layer, then I can set up an approach, a glide path that will bring me out about where that star cluster came up, and then if he hears me coming, he pops the smoke, I can land, pick up the recon team. So we do that. Well, about the time I enter the cloud layer, I go, ooh, it's maybe the dumbest thing I've ever done. I mean, you have no idea what's below that. And everybody in flight school would always say you have old pilots and you have bold pilots, but you don't have any old, bold pilots. So at this point, I'm thinking I may be the dumbest guy in America, because there's a lot of risk. But it works out. I get out, pop smoke, they hear me coming, I pick them up. Now I think I'm a genius. I think nobody else can do this. But now we have small arms fire coming the tree line. Now I'm not going to get out of here. But out of nowhere comes my attack helicopter, Lieutenant Doug Simmons, Simpson grad, and he shuts down that fire. He puts suppressive fire on, we get the recon team on, we get out of there. So we fly back, we do the debrief, and I said, you know, Doug, I did not expect you to come through that cloud layer with me. And he goes, I said, Gerry, we've known each other a long time. We played high school sports against each other. We played together in college. I was not letting you go through there alone. And Doug's not doing well now, so I was deeply appreciate the fact that he did that for us. He saved that helicopter and that recon team that day, so we're appreciative of that. It's not long after that, I get a little emotional once in a while, that we're going to put a recon team in a little south of the Ashaw Valley, do the same thing. The 5-man recon team looks around, does their thing, and then we go back and get them. But this day we're just putting them in. It's much simpler, it's a beautiful day. We fly out, Doug's flying the guns again. We put the recon team in, we start back out, no issue. 2 or 3 minutes out, get the call, recon team later, he calls Lady Ace, that's me, I got the call sign, and he said, we can fire, we have a WIA, a wounded in action, you got to come back and get us. Well, those are 3 things you never want to hear. You know, we got a wounded in action, we're in contact, you got to come back and get us. So we turn around, we head back, and we know where the fire's coming. It's come from this ridge line, so the attack helicopter's going to put some suppressive fire on that hill line. I'm going to come in and get the thing. Get the recon team. We start that, but we're getting all kinds of fire, much more intense than we thought. So we wave off, We try the same thing again, it doesn't work. Finally now, we're pretty short on gas, pretty short on ammo. So, talked to the recon team, I said, if you could move over that little ridge line about 20 yards from you, we can't land, but I think we can pull you through the side door and we'll get indefinite from the fire. And Doug thinks it's a good idea, he's impressed what they got. So we try that. I come in now, I'm intense. My blades are about 1.5 feet from the ridge line, so if I hit that, it's finished, I'm done. And so is my crew and everybody else. But we managed to pull them through the side door. As I'm intent, there's glass flying all over the cockpit. You can hear the rounds cooking off inside your helicopter. And finally the crew chief says, we've got them all on board, we can go. So I take off, I don't know how this thing is still flying, we have so many hits in it. So now we assess. My co-pilot's been hit, he's severely wounded, he's not going to make it. One of my gunners is not going to make it. The crew chief and the gunner are wounded. 3 of the recon team are wounded, 2 aren't going to make it. So you fly back, you land at Charlie Med, we have 80-some hits in the helicopter, but then you assess yourself. You say, I don't have a scratch on me. I don't know why it happens like that. We have no clue, but there's probably not many days that goes by in my life that I don't think about those young Marines who didn't come home. It's a sad thing. But anyway, that being said, now we're bringing this thing to a close. Not me yet, but Nixon's planning on withdrawal. We all come home from Vietnam, and Nixon's planning withdrawal. We actually bring a lot of troops home. America is very, very tired of this war now. We're all very weary. There's some very poignant scenes. This is the one I never forget from, I'm back home now. It's probably late 70s. This is the headline in the paper. It said, the troop withdrawals continue. How sad is that? And all these flag-lined caskets. One thing I want to point out, for those who were there, the South Vietnamese Army gets it's a tough rap. But on the Easter Offensive 1972, Americans are basically gone. But we have advisors still with the South Vietnamese. The North attacks across the border on Easter of 1972, but we're still supplying the Vietnamese. They do a magnificent job. They push the NVA back out of a pine tree and across the border, the 17th parallel. So my thoughts are always that they were good fighters if they were equipped with the right equipment, and we could do that for them. 1973, of course, the peace talks began. Finally get a deal. Henry Kissinger and Lee Dak-to, for those who remember, those who see history. Bill Fredericks has probably taught everybody that stuff because he's a history major here, teaches it. Remember, they get the Nobel Peace Prize. Lee Dak-to refuses it. Kissinger takes it. Well, the reason he refuses is because they're leaving troops in South Vietnam. It's not going to be long before they're on the offensive again. And it isn't. But the U.S. withdraws. Remember, we had 500 and some POWs at this time, which was also a big factor in us getting out of this thing. We were able to bring the 500 POWs that were in Hanoi home. Now what sets up? Late 74, early 75, the North Vietnamese come across the border, the 17th parallel. They also come through Cambodia and Laos. And now we're going to get Operation Frequent Wind. They've cut the country in half. They're moving on Saigon. And really, the Americans have a pretty good plan. They know they're going to have to evacuate all the Americans and most of those people who supported the United States of America during the Vietnam War, and there was a lot of Vietnamese, and there's third country nationals. The first option was, the Saigon River is big. You can take a military sea lift command ship or an actual Navy ship right up to a dock, probably a block and a half from the embassy in Saigon. You probably could have got everybody out. Ambassador Graham Martin at this time decides that would cause chaos and panic. He doesn't want to do it. The other two options are using Tan Son Nhut Air Base, which is a joint use civilian and military air base. We could use either commercial aviation, United or Flying Tiger Airlines or Delta. Those are the ones who actually ferried us over in the late 60s. So that was not an issue. But again, he decides he can't allow this because of the panic and thing. Well, by this time, of course, the North Vietnamese are in Hoi An, which is about 25 miles north of Saigon. and they decide they want to rocket and bomb the runway at Tonkin. Now all those options are off the table, so you have nothing left but the helicopter option, Marine helicopters off Navy ships, the South China Sea. And we have a massive amount of helicopters out there. We're ready for this. People don't remember, but on 12 April 1975, we evacuated Phnom Penh from Cambodia. Took the American embassy out. It was a one lift. It was very simple. We kind of thought the same thing could happen here, but the ambassador's in charge. So what happens on this day, we can't use those other options. We execute Operation Frequent Wind, which is the helicopter evacuation of Saigon. My job, early on, I'm designated to pick up the ambassador, basically 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and bring him out. Sounds like an easy mission. I'm kind of happy with that. I feel I was selected for certain reasons. I'm not sure what they were. But anyway, I fly into the American embassy. The rest of the air crews are getting out of the DAO compound. We had a few people in the DAO compound out at Tonkin. And we have, of course, the largest contingent at the embassy. I landed at the embassy, called the guy over and said, I'm here to get the ambassador. The guy says, fine, he's not ready to come. All right, I don't know what to do. So they load me up with Vietnamese, probably some third country nationals, a few Americans. But because I'm flying Lady Ace, I get vectored to the command ship, the USS Blue Ridge. So on the deck, of course, comes General Kerry and Admiral Whittemire. They want to know where the ambassador is. You're supposed to get him. I don't have any problem with him. You can talk to him all you want. The White House can talk to him anytime they want. If you want him to come out, tell him to come out. So now the airlift continues. It goes on and on and on. And about every third or fourth time, we clean out the DAO compound. About every third or fourth time I land on the embassy roof now, I say, where's the ambassador? So he's not ready to come. And if I land on the USS Blue Ridge, if I get vectored to the command ship, I get the same thing. I get General Kerry, Admiral Whittemire, want to know what's your job? Where's the ambassador? I don't know. I mean, I have no ability to talk to him. So this is starting to get old. Now it's getting dark, it's starting to rain, and we're losing some helicopters just for maintenance reasons. So this goes on, and like I said, every third or fourth time I'm doing this, but the crowds never get any smaller at the embassy. The ambassador wants to get as many people out as he possibly can, and those Vietnamese that supported us. So he keeps letting people into the grounds. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out we got to get the ambassador out to get this thing over. But it goes on and on. He doesn't come out. Now the interesting part of this, I think it's about 2 or 3 in the morning after numerous passes. I don't hear anything on the radios. When you call, when you fly across the land, you're back going to the ships, you call gallant man and say, gallant man, this is Lady Ace, section feet wet. You go back across, you call the Air Force Command and Control, cricket, Lady Ace, feet wet. So that's how it goes. But anyway, we're coming back out, we've done a couple of runs, hear nothing. I don't hear anything. My hearing's not bad. So I called my wingman and I said, are you hearing anything? He said, no. So now we do one more pass, it's like 4 in the morning. So I call HDC, Helicopter Direct Control on the Okinawa. I said, let me tell you the situation here. I said, I can see the tanks coming down the road. The embassy grounds are full. The ambassador and his staff are still in there. We got 60 Marines at the embassy. And we got 2 helicopters out of 65 flying. What the hell's going on? So we said, well, they all shut down for crew rest. I think, well, I started first. That would have been nice information to have. But I didn't have it. But now it is crucial now. I mean, we've got to get this thing done. The Vietnamese are not that far away, North Vietnamese. So I decided, I don't care what it takes this time, I'm going to get the ambassador out. Not sure how. I keep thinking to myself, if you want him out so bad, he does have a problem with the White House. He could talk to Henry Kissinger, the ambassador. Why don't you call him and say, get out? They don't. So I land on the roof, just me and my wingman again, and they load me up, of course, with Vietnamese, third country nationals, do the same dog reporting. I said to my crew chief, get them all off. This airplane's not leaving. So then I called Sergeant Bennington, who I met later. I said, this aircraft's not leaving the roof until the ambassador's on board. I thought I better sweeten it a little bit, so probably in my squeaky voice I said, the president sends. And right now. 2 minutes later, he's on board. So I said, I could have done this 10 hours ago. But then I also thought, I had great thoughts about this later on. I said, you know, President Ford couldn't order him out. Kissinger couldn't order him out. Takes a young Marine from Simpson College. So that's my story. We had to make one more lift. We had to go back and get the Marines. But once, we talked about this earlier with another Marine, once the Marine took charge, the Marine security guard, they locked the doors, no more people came in. I'm sorry those people didn't get out. But then all we had was 60 Marines to get out. We picked up one more helicopter, and then the lift was finished. It was over. Ambassador Graham Martin, I always like to show this picture. Somebody said, what did he look like? I said he looked like he was scraped off the floor of an all-night restroom. But that being said, I know he's a very haggard man, a lot on his mind. These are just pictures of basically the Operation Frequent Wind as it went down. It was a long day. It was the largest helicopter evacuation in history, probably always will be. But there's a start. There's Lady 809. For anybody who ever goes to San Diego, I think this is the start because it flew 18.3 hours without any problems. It's in the Flying Weather Museum at Marine Corps Air Station Miramar. And it's the only, they've got hundreds of airplanes there, but it's the only one that actually did a mission that they can identify. And I like it a lot because they got my name on the side. What do we do with the Vietnamese? We brought them out. This is, I think, an interesting story. We first took them to the Philippines, then to Guam, and then to Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton, and then they dispersed out into society. And I think they've done a great job. I still do 2 or 3 events with the Vietnamese Marines. People came from Vietnam during that era in Orlando. And let me tell you this, they really appreciate the support that Americans gave them. This is something else. If you haven't seen it, it makes me cry. I make my pilgrimage about every 2 years. It's the Vietnam Memorial. And of course, all the names are on there of everybody who died. So you have to go see. I think this is a war, and we've talked about it many times, reading the papers. It touched just about everybody's life in this country in some capacity, a relative or something. And it was, although it was probably the most unpopular, the most unjust war, I think, in the eyes of many people, it was probably also the most unselfish. Now think about that. America really didn't want anything out of this. There was no territorial gain, there was nothing. We just wanted, as far as I can tell, just the South Indies to be free. It would not be a communist country. We weren't successful, but I still say it was one of the most unselfish wars. Now, of course, Robert McNamara, this genius from Ford, writes a book in 2003. In retrospect is named the book. I'd recommend it to anybody if you want some bad reading. This is it. He says this: we were terribly wrong. Take a genius to figure that out after 58,000 and some lives. And the hard part is, we watched the French do the same thing. They lost 117,000, we come back and lose 58. It's hard to figure. But anyway, there's always a good story that comes out. I was the XO of the basic school at Quantico, and it's like the number 2 guy, I don't know what you really do. But anyway, this kid comes in, this young Marine comes in one day and he said, I think I came out of your helicopter in 1975. I said, of course you did. Everybody came out of it. I said, okay. And he's just a great guy. So he becomes a Marine. He gets here at 9 years old. In 9 years, he goes to UCLA. Gets in. But we realize now it's not that hard, but they didn't have to. I couldn't help that. But he graduates from UCLA, joins the Marine Corps. Now it gets better. He's got a flight guarantee. He goes on to fly CH-46 helicopters, the same helicopter that brought him out, in the same squadron that I belong to. It's a great story. And we were just up to see him at Sawgrass. He invited us up for a veteran's speech. So he's a great guy. He married an Irish Catholic girl from Jacksonville, Florida. So we get to see him too often now. Okay. I just threw that. But we're done. We'll take questions. I hope we didn't go too long, did we? I'm not sure we can take questions from you. Good.
During the evacuation, was Benoit not operational?
No, Benoit had been captured by that point. Yeah, we just delayed. And I think the South Vietnamese forces put up a pretty good fight for Benoit. But once they got that, it was over. Yeah, it was sad. That would have been a good evacuation point also if we had done the execution earlier.
Have you ever gone back to Vietnam, or do you ever have a desire to go back to Vietnam?
I've gone back twice.
What was it like?
You know, I'm going to tell you this. You walk down the streets of Saigon. When we went back to Saigon, I went with Peter Arnett from CNN. We did a special. This is 1994. But I was amazed at how they loved Americans. This is something they really did. I think a lot of, we probably sell a little short. They absolutely love what America tried to do for them. And I think they're doing well now, but they never enjoyed being under communist rule. And the interesting thing about Q, his dad was put in a re-education camp for 17 years. Sad. Really sad. But yeah, then I went back one other time. This is an interesting story. I went back and ran the 1996 Ho Chi Minh City Marathon. Not very well, but I participated. It was great.
I hope this didn't happen, but I've heard stories of when people came back from the Vietnam War that Americans didn't treat them very well. Like one story was they came back on a ship and they were going under a bridge and people poured paint all over them. Did anything like that happen to you?
No, that's a question you always get. I can only tell my stories on that. And I never had. I came back to Southern California when I first came back. Used to hang out at Laguna Beach all the time and hit the bars and stuff, and never had a problem. But my best story, I guess, is shortly after I come home in February of 1970, I'm in my car, I'm driving back to Central Iowa. My mom lives in Des Moines, but now I have some real issues. My car starts overheating. I get out, I check the oil, it's got all kinds of foam in it, I don't know what's going on, but I'm a little south of Wichita. So I said, I don't care if I blow up. I'm going to stomp this thing, get to Wichita. So I pull off at the first place I can, a little garage there. I said to the guy, it's like 5, maybe 5:30 after. He said, no, we're closing, I can't help you. He said, come back at 8 in the morning and we'll assess what we got. He said, go down the street to the motel, I'll call him and he'll take care of it. So I go down the street, do this, I'm going to go back at 8 in the morning. I can't pay in the morning. The guy said, no, the guy at the garage takes care of everything. That was me, right to it. So I walk down the street, Wichita, Kansas, and my car's sitting out front. It's detailed, it's washed, it's beautiful. These guys stayed all night, fixed the car, wouldn't take a dime. I said, my God, that's terrific. It still makes me cry to this day. Wichita State's playing on TV, I'm all for it. The other one I have is shortly after that, same car, I get in a speed trap in Des Moines. Not nice, but it happens. So anyway, they got about 15 cars lined up. Policeman comes in those days, your driver's license in Iowa never expired if you had an active military ID. So I show my driver's license, I show my military ID. Cop says, hey, Marine here. Come on now, no ticket. He said, hey, drive more carefully. I said, I'll think of it. So those are my stories. And I've heard those stories before, and I hate to say this, I think some of that stuff gets exaggerated. I'm not saying it never happened. I do not know anybody who ever got spit on or any of those things that you've heard about. I'm not saying it didn't happen. It certainly didn't happen to me. And I had a wonderful reception. Maybe it's just where I was. You know, Iowa's a great place, so you come back here, it wasn't too bad. Then I went to jet transition in Meridian, Mississippi. You know, no problem down there at all. So that's a great question. That's always asked. I know what happened to some. Anything else?
My brother-in-law was a special advisor in 1956. He was in the mountains with the Hmong people.
Yep.
And has the greatest of respect for them. And when they were here visiting, he spent 35 years in the active army. And when they were here visiting a few years ago, we were able to connect them. He was interested about the Hmong community here and what Governor Ray had done. And there were people there, just by fluke, that he had known. The family knew him, recognized him. And it was incredibly
It's a
touching.
great story.
So,
Yeah. It is a small world sometimes. It really is. It connects everybody. Well, I want to say, before I started, Judge Claude, I should have said this before I started. He said before, Gerry Berry, he has the right to remain silent, he just doesn't have the ability. Yeah. Can I leave you with a poem, then we'll just call it a night, huh? I always like this poem because it certainly applies to educators, Marines, anybody. So, an old Marine going a lone highway came at evening dark and gray to a chasm vast and wide and steep, with waters running cold and deep. The Marine crossed in twilight dim, the sullen stream held no fear for him. Then when safe on the other side, he turned and built a bridge to span the tide. Old man, said a fellow pilgrim near, you're wasting your strength with building here. Your journey will end with the ending day. You never again will pass this way. You've crossed the chasm deep and wide. Why build you this bridge at eve tide? The Marine lifted his old gray head and said, good friend, in the path that I have come, he said, there follows after me today a youth whose feet must pass this way. A chasm that was not for me, to that fair-haired youth may a pitfall be. He too must cross in twilight dim. Good friend, I'm building that bridge for him. So good on all your education. Thank you very much. Anybody wants to go to Cal Stretcher on Pearl? And Lana, I didn't see you up there. I want to mention that you probably had the best smile in the state of Iowa.